Hello, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are calling in from, and welcome to the Partnership for Student Success and Innovate EDU's workshop focused on media and messaging for providers of evidence-based and people-powered student supports. We're really excited to come together for this on this particular topic today. I'm Kate Cochran, Managing Director of the Partnership for Student Success, and I'm joined here by my colleagues Dorothy Jones, Jen Piccolo, Laurent Peeler, also from the Partnership for Student Success, and Jessica Duff, my co-host from Innovate EDU. A little background on why we're hosting this. A major priority for the Partnership for Student Success during 2026 is to share more stories of impact when it comes to evidence-based and people-powered student supports. And the reason why we're doing this is because we know that there are so many examples of high quality and impactful work taking place across the country, but often we know that not all these programs actually are spotlit in the media, and sometimes people outside of the field of education don't know about them. And we, on the advice of our advisory committee, are really excited to do some more work to share this out. So a few actions that the Partnership for Student Success is taking this calendar year to achieve this or to make progress toward this goal. We're issuing communication stipends to a group of about 10 to 15 organizations who we've invited to share their story, organizations that are doing impactful work and haven't yet received significant media coverage of that work. Some of you are here today. Some were not able to join us, but this call is for a broader group. We, on Friday, released a messaging and communications toolkit, which I'll share with you shortly, that outlines some key strategies and tips for sharing your story with the media with a particular, and we've designed this with our partners at Innovate EDU with the particular audience of programs that are providing K-12 student supports. We're hosting today's workshop. There will be a recording of today's workshop. We will not be recording the breakout rooms or the conversation parts of the workshop so that people can feel free to share more candidly. But we will be recording the presentation parts and sharing that out publicly. We've also added a section to our monthly newsletter. You may have seen this in our most recent April newsletter, where we're highlighting stories of impact in the media. If you get positive earned media, we really encourage you to share it with us. We want to lift up positive stories about high impact tutoring, mentoring, student success coaching, post-secondary transition coaching, and wraparound or integrated student supports in the media. Please share it with us, whether it's large national press, small local press, education trade press, whatever it is, please share. And then we're also showcasing one coalition member per month. In April, we did a spotlight of the Literacy Lab, and they presented at our coalition call, and we also did a blog with them. And so that will continue to happen. So with that, our agenda, what to expect from today. Jessica is going to talk through some key tips and strategies for evidence-based student support providers to share their stories publicly with a range of different types of news media. So that's sort of the meat of our workshop. I'll talk a little bit about some tested messages that polling research indicates that resonate with a range of audiences in the United States. We'll have some time for Q&A. I encourage you throughout the call, if you have questions, add them to the Q&A function, and we'll get to them. And then we'll spend a good amount of time in breakout rooms, actually having you brainstorm and think through some ideas about what kind of story you might want to pitch, what kind of story you might want to tell about your program and its impact. This is all, you can be very far along in this journey. You can be, this is your first time thinking about it, but really the purpose of our breakout activity is to kind of get the creative juices flowing and start thinking about what type of story you might want to share publicly and get some feedback from peers and members of our team. And then we'll wrap up with a resource share and whole group share out. So our new toolkit, I don't think anyone has seen this since we just published it on Friday, but really encourage you to check this out. After this workshop, a lot of the content that will be shared in this workshop is outlined in more detail in the toolkit. And it has some really great strategies for how to share your work publicly, if you maybe haven't done that before, or if you have done it before and are looking to do it with a new lens. So with that, I'm excited to introduce today's speaker, Jessica Duff. Jessica is the Marketing Communications Manager at Innovate EDU. Innovate EDU is a nonprofit organization that focuses on addressing a range of pressing challenges in education, whether that's technology, human capital, policy, other things. And so we're really excited to have partnered with Jessica on the toolkit and also to learn from her expertise and experience today. So over to you, Jessica.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Kate, and excited to be here with the team from PSS as well as all of those who are attending from across the US. I saw we had one person join in the chat and let us know where they're from. I would love to know where everyone's from. So if you want to drop your name and where you're joining us from, that also gives some insight as to where we're looking for some of these media messages to be coming from, to help frame some of the content. So let's dive in. And as Kate mentioned, a lot of the elements that we'll go over today are really more in depth within the toolkit. So we'll have an opportunity after this where you'll be able to dive through that toolkit and see some of the information here. So the very first step when you're jumping into a media pitch is you want to prepare the angle of your story. If you don't have that context from the beginning, it's kind of setting up to fail. So to fail, the structure of the story, the foundation of the story has to be set before you move forward. So you're thinking about why are you sharing this story now? Who is it we're sharing with? And then, like Kate mentioned, kind of teased a little bit the pitch type that you're going to do. So let's dive into some of those pitch types that you can do. So there are several different formats in which you can pitch a story. The first that we'll talk about is an op-ed or written commentary. And then we have a video news release or a video feature, an event invitation, or being a subject matter expert. So with the op-ed and commentary, this is where you're trying to shift the narrative on whether it's research or it's a new data piece that's come out, evidence that already exists, and you're just substantiating that information. So it's your opinion on the particular topic where you can kind of sprinkle in some of the data and the research, but offer your own personal take on it. These usually range from 600 to like 1,200 words, depending on where you're pitching. So it is kind of a longer form piece that you're pitching here. Video news release or a feature is pretty much like it sounds. This is where you have a strong visual impact. So if this is something that is involved in the classroom and there are a lot of elements that you're wanting to showcase, or thinking outside of maybe the education space, if you were having a new construction and had some visuals of a building that was being created, you could have those visual elements, but also it's tailored back to the human focus. So we don't see these as often in the education space just because a lot of times it's more based on evidence or data or a new research piece that's come out where it's kind of hard to find that video tie-in. But if you do have a visual element, this is a great opportunity to pitch that. And we'll dive into more about how that looks a little bit later and again in the toolkit. Event invitation, you may also see these framed as a media advisory. So this is where you're going to be hosting a major event and you're wanting to invite media to attend it or to cover it, whether in person or just in some sort of publication on maybe a digital format. So this is where you can do some of those high energy milestone events and have the opportunity to share those. And always think in this case, you want that visual element as well. So if there's an opportunity for video to be taken or photos to be captured at the event, that's a great call out. And then if you have high profile attendees that could be potential interview candidates, you'll want to include that in your media pitch for an event invitation. And then lastly, the subject matter expert. It's more than the op-ed commentary area because you were offering, if you are a subject matter expert, you're very well versed in the topic of discussion, the topic at hand. It's an opportunity for you to really hone in on the data, the research, the elements that make you that subject matter expert without diving into the opinion side of it. So it's very much providing that nonpartisan, that neutral voice to a particular conversation, as you may be the expert on the topic without leaning one way or the other on the particular story. So we talked a little bit about each of the areas. Now let's give some details about what each of those mean. I mentioned the op-ed, or also called a guest essay, the commentary piece. I said 600 to 1200 words. We have 600 to 750 here. That's kind of the sweet spot. There are some publications who can take up to 1,000 or to 1,200 words, but your minimum definitely needs to be at least 600. These are going to be outlets. If you're thinking of, where you might read an op-ed, that could be, New York Times or Ed Week, the 74. I know Ed Week in particular won't take anything over 1,000. Ed Search doesn't take anything over 1,200. So kind of staying in that 600 to maybe 800 word count is the sweet spot. If you're doing I'm going to jump down to the B-roll and the raw video. So this is for that video release. So if you have content that you're able to provide in this aspect, then being able to stay 2 to 3 minutes. You don't want to overwhelm the media outlet that you're sharing this with, where there's too much content that they then have to sift through. Because if you think about when you're watching the news, you usually only have a story on the air. Each story gets 20 to 30 seconds. So if you're giving them 15 minutes of content to have to sift through to pick 30 seconds for sharing, you're putting more work on them. So if you can cut that down, jumping back up to the pitch email. So when you're sending this message to a reporter, to an editor, and you want to make it as catchy as you can, but still provide enough context. So think between the 150 to 200 word range. You definitely don't want them having to be scrolling through multiple clicks through of scrolling through an email, because that can be overwhelming. I'm sure they get probably dozens of media pitches a day, so you want yours to stand out amongst all of the others. If you are preparing a video that is already captured and ready to go, you've got your video, maybe a soundbite mixed in. This is something that could be really shared quickly in a digital format, maybe on a social media post. Think in that 60 to 90 minutes, 60 to 90 second range. Again, not only are you making it digestible for the reporter or the editor to turn around and share it, but for the consumer on the other side who's watching it. When folks are looking at video content, with everything that's out there these days, whether it is on a social media channel or on a news site, short, sweet, and to the point is what they're looking for. So stay in that 60 to 90 second frame there, and make sure that hook is within the first 3 to 5 seconds. So you're capturing the attention right off the bat and keeps them engaged for the entire message that you're trying to share. And finally, press release. So this is not quite a media invitation. So say you're having a major milestone event and you sent that media pitch with an event invitation. Well, this would be the press release that would come out after the event. So you're going to have information about what happened, maybe a couple quotes from those who attended or helped organize the event, and if there's any call to action. So you're going to summarize all of this. If you can stay in one page, that's ideal. Sometimes you do have a lot of information, or if it's a collaboration piece and you're including quotes from maybe 2 or 3 individuals who participated in the research or the event or the data piece that's coming out, that can take it onto a second page. But don't ever go beyond 2 pages, because producers, reporters, editors are not going to read past a page and a half. But it is helpful to have the press release because it gives them the content that they need to turn around and write a story, whether for print or for on air, um, because you've given them all of the information. And do this in what's called the pyramid format. So your most critical information is going to be at the top of your press release, and then you end with background information. You've probably seen this in multiple press releases where you don't even find out the background on the company that's involved until the last paragraph or so. So that's important info at top, background ending at the bottom. All right, when you are preparing your story, there's a couple elements to keep in mind so that you stand out among the crowd. I mentioned reporters, editors, producers, they're getting dozens, maybe even more than that, of pitches each day. So, how do you stand out and make your story the one that is selected? Be unique. So distinguish your work from the status quo. Emphasize how your story maybe has a positive impact on students and communities. What makes what you're doing better for students, better for the community in which you're involved? And that human element is really the hook because in a world that is so cluttered with kind of the negative news, if there's a way to frame it with a human hook where you're having a positive influence and they can tie it back to what really touches the heart by being that human element, then we have a more successful chance of being a more positive chance of being selected for your story. It can, maybe it's a student or a mentor, an educator, where their journey just really illustrates how your program has an impact, not just on them, but on the greater good for this particular topic. So it's not a requirement to have that human touch because sometimes research doesn't always have a role. Like it helped, Bobby Sue do really well and her by having this particular mentor. We may not have that particular hook, but if you have a way to drag that in, definitely reach in and do that. It also is really helpful to build relationships with reporters. This is a way where you can really tailor the pitch when you're sharing it with a particular reporter. You can connect with them by following up on your lead. You when you're reaching these reporters, multiple reporters have different angles that they follow. They have a beat. So if you're in the education space, you don't want to send your story to somebody who's doing, policy only or somebody who's doing finance reporting. Find somebody who's specific to your particular beat, and that's a greater chance of building that relationship one-on-one with somebody who's in your particular sector. Following the lead, when you're making those relationships and you know who follows that beat, that education beat, you can find out who is particularly focused on tutoring, who is particularly focused on mentor relationships, who's focused on apprenticeship building. So you can get even more specific on following the leads that they push out, and then you can give them more tailored, more direct content. Mention keeping it neutral. In a world where it's very easy to fall on one side of a story, those who have that nonpartisan approach, that neutral voice, are often picked up more because they'll reach a broader audience because they're not being too divert or too hot topic, too difficult to relate to if you're able to be nonpartisan and be neutral. Makes you a more accepted subject matter expert. And then those reporters are excited to work with you because they know that they can get that neutral voice from you over and over again if you have a conversation piece or a data topic that you want to share in the future. And then also, it is helpful to have the personal touch. Especially if you're pitching something like I mentioned at the beginning with an op-ed or a commentary piece, you're providing that personal view. So maybe frame your pitch with the reporters and as a personal conversation. If you follow them on social media and you see they have, maybe some of their personal conversation pieces or when they share out posts and some of the stories that they're writing that have a personal element, circle back in that in your pitch so you have an opportunity to maybe find that personal connection with them. And you can even do this not just in an email, but if you have an opportunity for in person or over the phone meetings, find a way to have that personal touch tied back into the conversation because it just makes you feel like it's a more relatable conversation and also brings back that human element that we mentioned at the beginning. All right, there are technically three phases to pitching your story. Basically, it's before the pitch, during the pitch, and after the pitch. Um, you wouldn't think that all three would be part of actually pitching the story, but there are different elements that you should keep in mind while you're going through this process. So before the pitch, there's five things to keep in mind. First, determine your timeline. Um, Starting with when you know you have time to write it, and then backdating it when an ideal time would be for the story to be published. So if this is supposed to coincide with the release of a report, then you want to make sure that you've written it well enough in advance that gives you time to not only pitch it, but to do a follow up in hopes that it will be published by a particular timeline. Identifying your target is knowing the particular or possible publication and reporter that you would want to cover it. Writing it for, you know, a mom of three kids in, North Dakota might be one thing, but what publication might that parent have access to? And then who's the reporter at that publication that I could connect with? So identifying the target. Refine your hook. So this goes back to the beginning of what your story is, making sure that first sentence is punchy, that it's relevant to whatever the current trend is that you're writing about, and that you're capturing them right off the start. Next two, we have gathering the evidence and preparing your human element. Gathering the evidence is making sure you've got your data points ready to go, all the information that you're wanting to include in your pitch, that you have that ready to go. The story is written, but you need all of your data points ready on the pitch in case there's a comeback question, especially if this is in person or an over the phone pitch. You want to have those elements ready. And then preparing your human element, readying the human element, that means that you might want to make sure you have either a student or an educator or someone who is already cleared, media permissions allowed, media release signed, and available to speak or potentially highlight in your story. So if a reporter wants to take what you've written and take it to a next step and maybe do a further interview after it, and you need to be able to provide that other human element outside of your voice for the story. During the pitch, there's three things to keep in mind. This is that email that you're sending out. Keep it short and sweet. Your subject line has to be strong and do so with integrity, and then finally be direct and clear. The short and sweet, make sure you're in that 150 to 200 word window for writing your email pitch. Your subject line, does it state what you're pitching? Does it have the news that you're trying to share? An example could be new data, 25% increase in math scores via high impact tutoring. That captures it, that says what you're sharing. It's got a statistic in it. It's a catchy subject that's not trying to be clickbait subject line. And direct and clear, did I state if I want an interview or did you provide content directly? And then something that I think we lean on too easy, and it's totally fine. AI is there. It's a friend. It's helpful. You can use it. But if you're using AI to write your email pitch, review that email beforehand and remove obvious AI syntax. So make those edits. I know we all love M dashes, but if there's a copious amount of M dashes, cut a couple down, replace with commas, remove emojis where it's obvious it was written with AI because reporters are going to weed out those requests that have the obvious AI language because they want to hear the authentic voice, not the AI voice. Not only in the email pitch, but then they're worried that the story itself is probably riddled with AI. And then after the pitch, so you send it off, and then, now what? You're waiting. So you want to follow up And if you haven't heard back in about 48 hours, that's when you would send, a short, respectful bump email just to check back in. It's a circle back email. Rapid response. So if they do reply, do you have everything ready to go to coordinate your response? Uh, Maybe it's that interview piece, maybe it's the data point ready to supplement what you pitched already. You need to have those elements ready to go if you do get a response back. So if the publication you're originally pitching to passes on you, pitch again. Like they say, try again. So be prepared to send the story to a different publication. So when kind of goes back to the before the pitch, have a list of and maybe your top five and just go in order. So they don't have to know that they were number three or four on the list. Only you know that as you're sending this out. If you're forwarding an email, change the subject line, take off the forward, and make sure that it's still a fresh email. No evidence that it's a repitch. And then if you need to make any shifts to your timeline or the pitch itself, make sure you change that in the email, or particularly if the story needs it as well. If the story is picked up by publication option number one or number five, ask for a copy of the publication. They can send it to you via email once it's published, either by a link or a PDF of the story so that you have it and you know that it's out and ready to go. And then you can share it with not only as Kate requested at the beginning of the call, via the PSS team, or we can share it on social media because you want to share the word that you were published. So that's a great opportunity to spread the word. All right, so just some quick tips on responding to reporter inquiries. Never agree to an interview on the spot. When you do this, sometimes reporters want like a hot take. They want to know what your reaction is because they're trying to meet a deadline. But it's kind of like a tricky situation, and sometimes you can be caught off guard whether the reporter is intending to or not. So developing a standardized like holding statement to buy you time to prepare for the interview is always a strategic move. So have that in place. You want to have all of the relevant details ready to go before your interview time if a reporter has set this up. So like I mentioned earlier, data points, if you have someone that you're going to be interviewing, get all of those elements prepared ahead of time. And then while you're preparing for that interview, in your head, notepad or just wherever you retain the information best, define your audience, identify the hot topics that could potentially come up, and prepare your evidence. So having those three things ready to go for the interview will help you be more successful as you're responding to those reporter inquiries. There are a couple golden rules that I want to run through real quick before Kate dives into tested messages. And this is just things to remember. So, and there are more details on each of these in the toolkit, but first and foremost, everything is off record. Even if the reporter says, don't worry, this is off the record. It's still on the record. Assume if you're being recorded, the mic is always hot. So that casual small talk that you have before the official interview could be included in the story. So just be mindful of that. Nothing is ever off the record. You are in charge of the narrative. The reporter is simply providing the questions, but you are providing the map. So their questions are really just the bridge to all the key messages that you've prepared for this interview opportunity. So keep that in mind. You are framing this narrative. We've said this over and over, human over anything else, that human impact over the technical jargon. It's so easy in the education world and a lot of professions to just start using your technical jargon, your education speak. But shift those into maybe a student success story. Find a way to make something that sounds too technical, too jargony, and be, more layman's terms with it. So it's easier to digest. Stay in your strategic lane. What this means is only speak to what you know. If a question kind of falls outside of your expertise, don't be afraid to tell them, well, that's not my area of expertise, but I know fill in the blank is really educated in this topic. I can set you up with an opportunity to speak to them. So that's a great way to not deflect, but to take that pressure off of you trying to come up with an answer by giving them somebody who will be able to answer it in a more adept way. And then finally, pivoting from negative questions to positive solutions. It's not always the reporter's intent, but if a reporter is being kind of negative or leaning towards maybe going down a hot topic negative path, reframe the conversation, bring it back to a positive, maybe an positive story or evidence-based practice, so that it shifts it and it doesn't even allow it to go down that negative path. And we're staying along the positive, staying factual based, we're being nonpartisan, we're being as neutral as we can in the conversation pieces. So those are kind of those five golden rules to remember. And again, each of those are talked about in more depth within the toolkit. So, Kate, we're back over to you for some of those tested messages.
Thank you so much, Jessica. I really appreciate it, and just really appreciate your expertise on this topic. And it's definitely been helpful to me, and I hope it's helpful to people who are on the call or who will listen to the recording. This is detailed in much more detail in the toolkit, but a couple things that I wanted to highlight for our coalition in particular is that there are a number of different types of messages that research about our work that research and polling already indicates resonate with a broad range of people and some particular key audiences. So as you're thinking about crafting your story, and we'll head into our breakouts shortly, but consider highlighting evidence of impact, whether it's, maybe you have really robust evidence of impact, a randomized controlled trial. Maybe you have some preliminary data. Maybe your model is designed in a way that's consistent with more robust data. Make sure that you're sharing or consider sharing that evidence of your impact. Remember and do research on the broad popularity of the supports that you provide to students among key stakeholders, parents, educators, other key groups, organizations like 50CAN and EdChoice, and that's just to name a couple. There are others, do public polling pretty frequently to kind of get a pulse on parents, on teachers, voters across across different political parties, and what their opinions are on things like tutoring, mentoring, after school enrichment, things like that. Look to those and use those messages in your favor when they demonstrate positive or broad support for your type of work. Also remember that a lot of the work that each of us does already has bipartisan support, whether it's AmeriCorps programs, whether it's high impact tutoring. And if that works to your advantage in these types of stories, don't hesitate to highlight that. And then the last thing is highlighting unmet demand. I think anybody who works in I think any of our organizations knows that there's a significant amount of unmet demand, and that research demonstrates that unmet demand for high impact tutoring, for mentoring, for wraparound supports. And highlighting the gap that your program or your work is filling is really crucial. In the toolkit, we go into some specific tested messages for each type of student support that PSS focuses on, as well as a couple other things that we think will resonate with our coalition, like AmeriCorps service and things like that. Encourage you to check those out. Feel free to use the research that's outlined there if helpful, or find your own. A couple final resources that I wanted to share. Sorry, my chat has disappeared. Here we go. So in the chat, I'm going to put, again, the link to our media and messaging toolkit, as well as a link to join our coalition as a supporting champion. I know many of you who are on this call are already part of our coalition, but we also know affiliates or members of some of our partner organizations joined us today. So if you're not part of our coalition today and you're interested in sort of more content like this, more opportunities to collaborate with peers, on topics related to evidence-based and people-powered student supports. I encourage you to join us. And then finally, want to encourage you that we hope this is a jumping off point for folks to have positive media placed about their programs and about their program's impact. And we hope that you share that with us, with really any member of our team, whoever you're most connected with. And we'd love to lift it up in our newsletter, on social media, etc.